Hello, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond. My name is Taylor, and this is the brand new Souls-like with a bit of change in perspective, Kristala, which just hit Steam Early Access last month. Kristala was developed and published by Astral Clocktower Studios and hit Steam near the end of June. It has a whole roadmap, which I will leave linked down below, along with the Steam page so you can check the game out for yourself. Now, the most striking element that you may have noticed is that you play as a cat person. For those of you who play D&D, they would be a tabaxi. For those who more commonly play Skyrim, it would be a Khajiit. But they are not named as their own race in the game that I've found, so I will continue to call them a tabaxi. Now, as I mentioned, it is entering early access at the time of recording, so it was very much not feature complete, and I will primarily be focusing on what the game has right now, not so much on what it could be in the future. The game starts out with a character creator. You're able to decide your name, the patterning and color of the cat, which is surprisingly widely varied and really nice to see, though I imagine there are a fair few varieties or breeds of cats that aren't available yet. You are also able to decide what clan you're a part of. Now, there are only 2 options right now, but it is planned for there to be about 6 different clans total. The biggest changes between them are the eye color and what magic you would have access to. From there, you select what class you want, and they only really have 2 different models right now, and it seems like the classes primarily affect initial stat allocation, and not necessarily your starting skills. You know, very much like a traditional Souls-like. That's fine, but the stats are a bit overwhelming when you first see them, but they boil down to the usual health, stamina, strength, dex, and magic stats for casters. You know, the pretty basic stuff. Once you have made your feline friend, you are thrown into the world, and you pick up a weird glowing rock which gives you a mission to retrieve 6 crystals, 1 from each of the 6 clans, and then you set out. On the ground, they've left a Crisp Pearl which gives you a magic point, meaning you can either unlock new magic or upgrading existing magic spells if you have them. And with that, let's get into the gameplay. Now, I did primarily do my playthrough as a sword and shield knight character who used the purple clan, I can't remember what the name was, and I focused my magic on bone armor and blood blade. So the bone armor skill was interesting in that it basically was a flat damage reduction, or was something that took damage for me before I started taking health damage. So I could see the visual effects on my character, which was nice, and then when those disappeared, I either knew the spell had run out, or I'd taken enough damage that it was negated, meaning I would start taking health damage again. Now, Bloodblade is something I took a little later, and was fine. I mean, it did help me do some additional chip damage here and there with a DOT, damage over time, but it wasn't anything significant, and I do hope to see some changes to how it works in the future. To balance it out, though, I did also do a short stint as a claw, like assassin-type character, using the Green Clan, who primarily focused on poison. Now, when I looked at their spells, they were kind of the same, sort of. There wasn't so much a protection buff with the Green Clan as there was kind of lifesteal, and they focused on poison over bleed, but many of their skills did seem to overlap to some degree in terms of their utility and what their main purpose was. Like I said earlier, each clan you have access to gives you a different magic skill tree. Now, when I looked at the skills for the 2 clans that are in the game right now, they seemed pretty similar with some kind of different elemental focuses and a few different skills, but they seem to act relatively the same. Each class gets access to the same magic as far as I'm aware, so the classes only really exist for the starting gear and stats, but right now do not change the magic spells that you have access to, because that is again tied to the clans. This means that classes almost don't matter outside of the gear, which is fine. That's usually how Souls-like goes, but I do want to see kind of magic be completely different between each clan. In terms of the regular combat, it's fine, you know, pretty fast-paced, seems to work on a similar system to Sekiro, where you drain the stamina and when it hits 0, you can perform a critical strike. Now, the critical strike is usually an instant kill for smaller enemies, but with larger enemies or bosses, it will just do a significant amount of damage to them, but not necessarily kill them. Along with that, you have your typical block, parry, and backstab system that you would find in any Souls-like. Weirdly enough, the game seems very focused on blocking and parrying with a shield. I played 2 different classes, one with the Knight class and the other with the Assassin style class to see how different they were. You were able to dodge, but it seems like you take more stamina to do that, and you can easily put yourself out of position when trying to dodge away. Along with the blocking, parrying takes stamina, meaning that you'll open yourself up for critical strike. Dodging, blocking, and parrying all will naturally take away your stamina, meaning you might open yourself up for a critical strike if it hits 0. Now, I did find more of a focus on blocking and parrying, especially because, half the classes are given a shield, and you're still allowed to block when you don't have a shield. And it just seemed like dodging wasn't always the best option. It was an interesting decision, because normally I find when Souls-likes want to do more of the Dark Souls thing, they focus on dodging. When they want to do more of the Sekiro thing, they focus on parrying, but not blocking per se. So this one seemed to focus on blocking and parrying, but kind of left dodging, kind of in the dust. Now, interestingly enough, the attacking and sprinting do not seem to take the same stamina that dodging, blocking, or parrying do. It is purely focused on defensive actions, meaning you can relentlessly hammer away at your enemies, without really risking being open for a critical attack unless they parry you. There is a bit of a stun lock system, but nothing, egregious. The same goes for parrying. It does a massive stamina bar damage to the opponent, and it should leave them open for a crit, but against a boss, it doesn't really leave them open in the same way. It is similar to Sekiro, where bosses and larger enemies can attack afterwards, meaning you have to parry many attacks before they get staggered for that visceral attack. Now, unfortunately, unlike Sekiro, it is not the most finely tuned thing on the planet, meaning there are some hiccups that I do hope kind of get, as I say, finely tuned as the game gets closer to full release, so that it can feel just that much better to parry consecutive attacks, because right now it feels a little awkward. Now, this applies to both weapon sets that I've encountered in the game, which have been the classic sword and board combo, as well as a set of claws that replace daggers as the fast attackers. I have not noticed any major differences between the parrying between the sets, but the shields are actually better for blocking, and I do believe the claws do more damage through their attack speed, but I haven't seen much of a difference in their attack speed, which is kind of weird. You attack really quickly with a sword, so it's really hard to say for sure if there's a major difference. I have not experienced too much with ranged spells, which is relatively short range. It feels like there's supposed to be more of an accent to the melee combat. I don't know if a pure casting class is planned for the future, but the game seems to be mostly balanced around melee with supporting magic spells to kind of supplement it. And I worry they'll really have difficulty balancing the addition of those spells, because if they want to introduce a variety of them, it will really change up how they have to create the enemy encounters to account for all the different situations they're going to create. They have a variety in terms of the presentation, but they boil down to the simple melee or ranged attack that you have to block or dodge. Thankfully, the bosses have a better pattern with their attacks, and have a wider variety of moves, so that's a little more promising. And I'm fine with easier, smaller enemies, but a little more variety is always appreciated. The biggest problem is that even when enemies have a different model, say a rat versus a spider versus a fish person, they all still feel very similar in how they're attacking, and it just feels very samey, even though they have a different model. So I want just a little more variety in how they move, how they attack, to make each enemy feel unique. Even the effects of damage over time, like bleeding or poison, only take health down slowly, and I would love for these to have kind of more diverse secondary effects. For example, if bleeding did more damage as the enemy moves, but poison, say, does more base damage even when they're not moving. So just have poison tick up faster in general, but have bleeding tick up primarily if the enemy's moving around a lot or taking a lot of actions. Now, I don't know what other effects they want in the game, but making all the status effects do something slightly different is nice because it helps all the combat to feel varied and complex. I would also like to see more weapons implemented with a variety of attack speeds and different attack patterns, because right now they seem very similar, which means they don't really feel distinctive. You could go as far as to separate the weapons based on the class that you chose to make that even more distinctive, which means you could tailor the magic more for that weapon style. Now, I already mentioned the game's in early access, which means that it will have resolved many of these issues by the time of full release, and have so much more content. However, I do hope they rework the combat, because right now it is too simple. The other major problem that I have with the game is the level design. They have a lot of maze-like levels, which are fine, but even the more normal levels are difficult to navigate, and I found them frustrating because I got lost way too often. I didn't even make it out of the Sacred Forest area, so I have not finished the first episode by the time that this recording goes out. Now, I appreciate the levels are connected with each other and make for a more cohesive world, but I feel like there are too many different paths that are not distinctive enough to kind of help me understand when I've been somewhere or when I'm in a new area of that same portion of the map. This does have me more worried than the combat, because the combat can be altered and changed, but their approach to level design is one that I really don't enjoy, and it seems like it would be difficult to change that moving forward and change what they already have, because that would mean they have to rework models, rework their routing, rework their planning as to where to put items, and just seems like a much bigger headache than making tweaks to the combat, which they're going to be doing anyway. I do hope they add more details in each area to make kind of your known path feel more distinctive, as well as even secondary paths, because all too often I would find myself walking in circles because everything looked relatively the same. The UI in itself is fine. It's early access. It's a little clunky, a little bulky. I wish it was a little more kind of streamlined, a little smaller. And the positioning is fine. I know, say, for example, John did a video on this game. I will link that in the description down below. He would like it to be more in line with traditional Souls games, which I'm also fine with, but I don't have that same muscle memory or instinct to look in those areas, and I try to adapt to whatever game I'm playing. So for me it's fine, but I can understand that for others it will be more difficult to adapt to. Though the quest log can be very distracting at times, and I do wish you could kind of hide your quest log or select it to only show one quest at a time, because right now it can take up almost a quarter of that top left hand corner, and a lot of those quest descriptions are way too vague for me to understand what's going on. So far the game has updates planned well into 2025, right till the end of that year, releasing every few months. A new episode will be added, which would include a new biome, 2 new boss fights, more enemies, a new clan, additions to the existing ones, and just even more stuff, or so they claim. Now, they seem to have plans for the next 18 or so months, and before they hit 1.0 release, and while I do believe that is possible, I always take roadmaps with a big grain of salt and add about a year onto their time frame, regardless of the scope and team size. Now, that usually does not hit, within the first few updates being a year late, but it often comes in the form of each update being a few weeks to a few months later due to player feedback and how much they want to listen to the community they're trying to service here, which all adds to the overall time that they have planned, and I usually look at this as a good thing so they can make the best possible product. Now, I do think they have a relatively realistic window to work with, and it is very clear that this timeline is subject to change. They have said that many times. They've also promised smaller updates every few weeks, so I am hopeful for this title because it does have a lot of potential to be something special if they choose to capitalize on what they have. Now, to close out this video, I wanted to give my final thoughts. Honestly, this game has so much potential, and because it's in such an early state, I don't want to judge it too harshly, but there are some issues that do need to be addressed. These issues are primarily around the combat and level design because both of them are in such early stages, they don't feel properly tested and fleshed out. I'm not talking about the skills or abilities, but the hit feedback and the overall speed of the game. The level design is vast and locked in some areas, but each area has too many portions which all seem too similar, leading to dumb players like me getting lost quite frequently. I want to slow the combat down a bit, make it feel more intentional, as well as work on signposting / environmental design to make them more clear. I don't want just a fully linear game, but I do want the game to be a little bit clearer. The good is mostly the potential, which is something I don't want to place a heavy emphasis on, but I do want to mention, that it is there, that it exists. The potential for each clan to have a unique skill set, magic spells, and potentially even weapons that would make the game much more replayable and interesting. They've set themselves up for success in the ways that they create lore for the 6 different clans with their own culture, magic spells, and individuality. I hope they lean into it more than what is currently in the game, but I do not want to put too much weight on it, the potential, as, we have to see what happens and where their vision goes. This is going to be kind of a stretch, but there used to be an old Teletoon cartoon called Daigata Defenders. It was a really weird one where you use stones with magic scissors. I'll put a picture up on screen, but this show had, I think it was like 13 different schools of magic or whatever they called it, and each one focused on a different realm, focused on not necessarily a different elemental energy, but a different idea around what crafted it. And I think to take a similar approach would be really helpful for this game, because it could mean that, again, each clan could feel unique, and each playthrough could feel totally different than the previous ones, by giving you just a whole new tool set to work with. Now, I do fully understand that is a lot of work. That may be much more work than these developers have time or even finances to support. So I wish them all the best, and I really hope it pans out with making everything feel, again, just kind of unique. Quick reminder that John also did a video on this game that I will leave linked in the description down below with his thoughts, so you can, check it out, compare his thoughts with my thoughts. Let me know in the comments what you think about the game. Are you looking to pick it up? Are you going to wait for a while? I would recommend waiting at least 6 months, let a few more updates come in, and kind of reevaluate the game at that stage. I will probably make another video every 6 months, maybe in a year, we'll see. Just to see how they've taken the game, even farther, what they've added, what they have not added, and how the roadmap is looking compared to what they thought it would. With all that being said, thank you, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, so much for watching to the end. I really appreciate it. I have a couple more games coming up soon. With that in mind, I hope to see you there.